Hello and welcome to the Innovate Zero podcast. I'm your host, Rich Shaw, the Sustainability Lead at PDM. We are a product design and innovation consultancy focused on reducing the environmental impacts of the products we create. We've got a special episode lined up today, a live panel session recorded at this year's MedTech Innovation Expo. The panellists cover a broad range of company sizes, but all have a focus in their role on sustainability. In this session, they share insights on how to leverage sustainability as an opportunity to grow your business and reduce emissions at the same time. Without further ado, let's get into the session.
Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us. It's great to have such a good turnout for the sustainability topics this morning. Thank you very much for Clare for kind of bringing us all up to speed on the landscape. I feel like I can skip the intro now because you've done such a fantastic job. But the sustainability landscape is moving very quickly, and it's for some organisations, they've been on the journey a long time, but for others, these NHS roadmap that we've just seen has kind of been the kickstart to that journey. And it's really caused for a rapid period of literacy building and then moving into carbon reduction plans. But trying to unpick what this means for an organisation, depending on the size of your organisation, the scope of your operations, it can all be very different. So the purpose of this panel session, what I wanted to achieve with it, was to provide some insights and inspiration. So no matter your company size or your stage on the sustainability journey, hopefully there's something you can take away, a little insight, something that might be that next step to take you forward on that journey. So how we're going to break things down is, I'm going to start off by just asking the panel some questions around how they started the journey. So what was it? What was the impetus? What was the starting point for them? What was the trigger? Was it internal? Was it external? Was there some immediate resistance within the company? And how did they overcome those? So I think, as Dan mentioned, we've got sort of a good cross-section of industry here today. So Addie, representing the ABHI, I might come to you first.
Sure, yeah.
So what has it meant for the members of the ABHI? How have they kind of started off on this journey? What was their kind of trigger there?
I think definitely started off overwhelmed, I think it's fair to say. Just to explain a bit about ABHI, so we're the industry body representing the medical device, diagnostics and digital health sector. We've got about 400 members. It is incredibly diverse as a sector, as is represented here today. And it is about 90% SME. So I think certainly in the beginning, for companies that didn't necessarily understand what sustainability even was, or your scope 1, 2, 3 emissions, let alone how you begin to measure them, it was incredibly difficult. So as you say, I think there's been a big learning journey over the last couple of years. Yeah. And the pace at which that everyone has dedicated time to this is commendable.
Yeah. And the NHS have been quite involved. I know with the roadmap starting out, that was kind of well received to begin with, getting organisations off and started. But what's kind of been the main barriers that the companies might have then faced, or how they kind of overcome some of those initial hurdles, you might say?
I think, as is the case with the landscape and with SMEs, resource and funding and time, I think there's an awful lot of goodwill, and I think the longer it's been since these requirements have been in, the more time that organisations have had to look into it, understand it, figure out what they need to do, gather the data they need to report, all those sorts of things. So I think it's, as we move on with the journey, everyone's increasing the amount they know, increasing the amount of time they can dedicate to these things cumulatively. And so it should just get better and better.
Yeah. Okay, fantastic. Thanks for that. Richard, I'll come to you next. So if you want to just continue the introduction just for the audience, who you are, what you do, your role at Pennine.
Yeah, sure. So my name's Richard Cohen. I'm Head of Operations and Sustainability for Pennine Healthcare, based in Derby.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. So for Pennine getting off and started on the journey, what was the impetus and the reason that you kind of...
So I think the trigger for us was that we were aware things were starting to shift in the industry some years ago. Certainly for us as a UK manufacturer and an employee-owned company as well, sustainability was important, but we were unsure where or how to start. You know, there wasn't that level of knowledge within the business. So we tried to initiate some programs and investment around what we did know, and that was Lean Six Sigma, and essentially that drives waste and variation, elimination from our processes and our plant. So the two go hand in hand, and we've been very successful to date with that particular program. Whilst the focus is sustainability, we gain the benefit, as Claire mentioned before, within our processes. So it's been very successful.
Brilliant. And Claire, bit of a spoiler, but from the previous slides. But what was the really early days? I know Boston's been on the journey a long time, but how did you overcome those initial hurdles and getting other teams on board and that kind of thing?
Yeah, so I mean, to be honest, our first starting point, going back to the first starting point, it was efficiencies. Yeah. It's really at, looking at, actually, it costs a lot of money to operate manufacturing. Where can we make efficiencies and savings? That's where it starts. And again, the lesson is really having a more sustainable approach has real cost-saving benefits. So that's where you're improving efficiencies. So that's where it started. Obviously, then we developed our sort of starting with that smaller strategy, looking at what are the emissions under our control. Then the scale, in a big multinational organization, it takes a while for things to permeate through. It takes a while to have that, understanding really what is the benefit. Often operations are separated out from the rest of the business. How do you bring it together? How do you make everyone see the value of actually continuing to do this, to invest, to move forward, to expand there? And I know, so that's where we started. There have been challenges. I'm not going to say it's easy, and I'm not going to say we've got it right. It's still a real journey, and I know we'll go into more of the challenges in a bit. So I don't know.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thanks. And Tom, I'll come to you next. So I know, Tom, your business model was kind of from the ground up, had sustainability kind of built in, and I was really keen to get you on the panel today to hopefully provide some inspiration to those innovators in the room, might be at the early stages, developing their technology and bringing it to market. There's an opportunity there, isn't there, from the starting point to think more sustainably about your product, about how that might fit into the healthcare system that you're moving into.
Yeah, certainly. So Tom Dawson, I'm the founder and CEO of Revolution Zero, and we were really formed out of the unsustainability which was exposed during the pandemic. And we've already talked about supply chain resilience, generation of waste, generation of emissions, and also the other things that happened, which I think we all know about, unethical business practices, people really fleecing things. So the exposure of the single-use, take, make, and waste model was really shown. So we've been working, and our focus has been on single-use. Displacing single-use medical textiles such as PPE, surgeons' gowns and operating theatre drapes with reusable alternatives. So everything we've done has been on the basis of circularity, preserving all resources. So it's really been an ongoing thing, preserving all resources, as Claire so well, that you bring up all sorts of efficiencies. So we look at energy preservation, water preservation, material preservation, and we even look at information preservation, so you don't get information leakage out of the system, because that again is another way you can really lose in efficiency. So it's sustainability built from the ground up, and very fortunate to be able to engineer that from literally a blank piece of paper. And it's it's wonderful where we've got to now, but that's sort of how our story started.
And that was quite a disruptive step, wasn't it? Because moving into that space, the predominantly single-use devices, so you spotted a niche. We talk about sustainability being an opportunity. You kind of found that as the impetus, really, the starting point for the company, and that's really, really interesting.
Yes, well and truly was. And early on, it's the worst time. I exited my last company and completed the exit on 2nd of March 2020. Started the new company on the 4th of March 2020. It's the worst time ever to start any company. There was no customers, there was nothing at all. And it was really, really hard yards. But at the same time, there was a great need. And as the world started picking up and started going again, we actually got dragged along by the NHS as well. So that was, it was really, really good to be in that position, actually go through those hard yards of doing it. And I think, again, fortunate to start right from the scratch.
Yeah, fantastic. So I'll come back to you again, Addie. So moving on to kind of where we're at today, it's been a bit of a journey. I know the NHS have been great getting the industry up to speed with lots of carbon literacy and webinars and pieces like that. And we're now, if I think back to Claire's slide on the roadmap, we're kind of looking at carbon reduction plans at the moment, and that's something I know a lot of ABHI members have already done, might be into their second iteration, or might still be putting their first one together. So in terms of kind of bringing things up to date, what's the kind of impression from the membership?
I think, as you say, in general, most of our members now have their carbon reduction plans, or they will have them in time for the next framework they're going for. And we know that it was incredibly challenging for people to pull them together, understand the data, all the things I said before. However, we also know that it's helped raise the conversation of sustainability in organisations. So in order to submit your carbon reduction plan and for it to be compliant, you need it signed off at board level, which means that your board has to know about it. And so in that respect, it's been incredibly useful, and I think it's more of an organisational change now and an organisational conversation than it was a few years ago, where it might have just been someone sent off on their own in the corner to figure it out.
Yeah.
So I think the conversation's moved on massively, and we're getting more and more members to our ABHI sustainability group. There's now 100 different companies getting involved in that. We're getting asked more questions about how we can move to a more circular economy, whether we can change any regulations, going beyond just what the roadmap is asking for from the industry itself. So I think it's really positive.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point you touched on there, is the work that the ABHI is doing to get the collective voice of industry. What are the barriers they're facing, and particularly with the likes of the NHS being the key market in the UK, is not pushing back so much as kind of sharing what the barriers that we're running into and where we need to collaborate more on that. Richard, how about for Pennine?
So to date, I'm pleased to say that we've done our scope 1, 2 and 3, and we also have a carbon reduction plan in place now. We have learnt an awful lot on this journey. It's been about 18 months, and I think from a SME point of view, the education piece has been really valuable. We've still got a lot to learn. We've made a few mistakes, but I think from the point of initiating this journey through sustainability, we've really achieved some great things. I'll give an example. We spoke very, very early on in our journey about identifying, things like energy consumption. And we put it a bit of an analogy on it, that during the weekend when the gates were locked, when no one was in the building, we had 1,500 kettles that were on permanently. Yeah. And it was, how do we find them 1,500 kettles? Yeah. So we set about it. We now know, thankfully, we know where these kettles exist, and there's things in place now where we're starting to hit one by one, and to obviously make improvements in that direction. I
know that kind of the carbon reduction plans, they came at just that point when the energy crisis was kicking off, and everyone was looking for those operational energy savings in particular. But looking beyond that, the carbon reduction plan that you had completed, was there any kind of surprises in there that maybe, God, I didn't realise that was contributing so much of our emissions?
Yeah, I think as Claire really sort of graphically showed on the slides before, a lot comes from the supply chain. For me personally, my background in FMCG, looking at other industries, how they've worked, predominantly food industry, where I've come from, these journeys were well underway 15 years ago. Yeah. And it's how we now can learn from them industries that have already had well-established journeys into the sustainability and net zero realm, bring that information, bring the technology into our industry, because it exists, it's there. Packaging, for example, working with commercial partners, which is one of our segments, just giving them that little bit of steer as to, have you thought about doing it this way? There is a better way, there's better materials to be used now. Yeah. So I think all of them things collectively add up to a really strong carbon reduction plan, not just for the company, but also the supply chains as well.
Yeah, fantastic. And Claire, I come to you again. I mean, from the slides that you've shown, obviously Boston's been on a huge journey, started many years ago compared to a lot of companies, but the same kind of impacts, supply chain being a huge one.
Yeah.
But yeah, from that starting point to today, what have been your kind of those real big barriers or those big step changes that have kind of brought people along?
So I think working within a big organisation, you have lots of silos. So I think one of the things that was a real surprise to so many people in the organisation was how much we were doing, because no one knew about it. We weren't talking about it. We weren't communicating outside of the fact our manufacturing team are doing these great things. I spent the last few days in our plant in Galway, and seeing what's happened there, I'd have had no idea. So the first thing actually is this increased focus, and things like looking at carbon reduction plans has actually required everyone to go, oh, we're doing this, that's brilliant. Well, if we're doing that, why aren't we doing that? And why doesn't everyone know about it? So it's fostered internal collaboration. I've come across some people who have some amazing skills and putting their brains to some of the, in MedTech, we have some of the biggest challenges, that can be faced. We're looking at how can we produce these technologies that save and make a difference to patients' lives. So applying those skill sets of these people who are over here to some of the challenges over there, it's a game changer. So it's been, that's one of the big pieces. But it is then, conversely, within an organisation of 48,000 employees, is how do you get the message across to have action across every aspect of the business that you need to have?
Yeah.
So you'll have someone talking to a supplier there, asking them, saying, we're just looking at cost, quality and cost over there, but actually we're not thinking about emissions because that hasn't filtered through to part of that ask.
Yeah.
So I guess that's one of the biggest challenges we found is how do we join it up? How do we educate everyone that actually this is part of everyone's business as usual? So it doesn't just belong to the sustainability team, it doesn't just belong to manufacturing, it belongs to each and every person within the organisation.
Yeah, fantastic. And Tom, I know you had that initial starting point was sustainability, but I know you'll have been on a journey as well in learning how that maps out into the healthcare setting and then building the business kind of year on year. How's that kind of unfolded?
Yeah, it's been, so we've looked at there's probably a couple of comments to make here really, and one is saying we're also a B Corp, so we look at the impact that we have on society as well, and we've been certified as a B Corp now, and there's very few medical device manufacturers. I think there's around, or even in the healthcare industry, only around 30 organisations globally, so there's really just a few of us. And that's around looking everything from your total supply chain to the impact you make on society to staffing as well. One of the things regarding carbon, obviously very close to what we do, we've had just under £2 million in contracts to develop net zero solutions for the NHS Wales, NHS England. And a lot of that has been validated by life cycle assessments, so not just looking at carbon, but looking at all the 16 different ways that your product can have an impact on the world, everything from displacement of land. And we look at it not just for our product, but also for our services. We also look at it for even for our buildings as well. So we require infrastructure, for instance, to reprocess the textiles. When we come into doing that, we have quite an interesting thing because we think of it more as a carbon investment plan. So we invest carbon to reduce carbon. So everything we do, actually just us sitting on stage is carbon. But hopefully the word we're spreading today is going to be reducing the overall carbon impact in the room. Claire was talking about solar panels. It costs carbon to make a solar panel and install it on the roof, but over time it's going to save. So the more carbon that our business uses, and we use renewable energy, we produce the world's first barrier clean room decontamination run on completely renewable energy. But that still costs energy in doing it. So the more carbon we actually produce, so if we actually don't reduce our carbon, if we increase our carbon by 100-fold, that's actually really, really good. It's positive. So because that's actually overall going to decrease the world's carbon a lot. So for instance, a 93 million surgical gowns used, sterile surgical gowns used across the NHS every year, and we can save 1 to 2 kilograms of carbon by replacing ours, which is going to cost carbon itself, probably about 700 grams of carbon, but overall that's saving 90 to 180 million kilograms per year. So again, it's thinking about how the carbon reduction plan, how the thoughts around carbon and carbon reduction are going to change over time. And again, that's also defining how net zero is going to change over time. That's a whole other topic. So, but just to plant the thing of carbon investment as well, and just you talk about money equals carbon. Yes, it does, but money involved in something sustainable is actually a carbon investment. So
yeah. So that cost equals carbon is something that we come up against a heck of a lot. And if perhaps you're not in a senior leadership role, but you're trying to kind of raise the profile of this topic internally, this is probably the best way to frame this argument within your organization, is to look to the financial impacts of the business activities and how operating more sustainably, you will quickly get the attention of the CFOs and you'll quickly gain a bit of a mandate to go forth and implement some of those changes. I might just bring the topic onto product for a second. So when we've talked about carbon reduction plans, this is something that we at PDM have been really getting involved with over the last few years, really to expedite the conversation around product. Because as we've seen, the impacts of products on an organization can be upwards of 70% of total emissions for that company. So if you're not going to address the emissions associated to your product, you haven't got a hope in hell really of reaching net zero. And this is a really difficult place to start because we are in a heavily regulated industry with really vast, complex supply chains. And so product it's a tough nut to crack, but we're all really aware that it's on the radar and we're going to have to approach it at some point. So Addie, I might come back to you. Where is the kind of sense of the industry, the membership at the moment in relation to product?
I think, as you say, it's incredibly challenging and everyone is at least aware of it now. Mm-hmm. But these changes are really difficult and are going to take some time. So just because there's not these millions and millions of new products on the market tomorrow that are incredibly circular and innovative doesn't mean that people aren't working on it behind closed doors. And I think what's also really positive is the amount of collaborative programs that are coming out of universities and government, specifically looking at things like circular economy, product design, what regulations we can change, how we can enable it, what are the policy levers, all those sorts of things. So there's Design for Life with Department of Health and Social Care, which I think every organisation on this panel is a part of as well, again, showing the level of collaboration. There's programmes like at University of Loughborough called ReMed, looking at recycling small medical devices, and we can look at recycling products, but as you say, we need to look at how we design the products so that we can recycle them or reuse them or remanufacture them or however it may be. So I think it's moving, but it is hard, and the most important thing at this point is the amount of engagement that we're getting on it and everyone's going in the same direction.
Yeah, fantastic. And Richard, at Pennine, has there been kind of a particular starting point? If you start prodding at that product box for a second, what's the starting point for you?
Yeah, I think just identifying the, I suppose, quick wins or the low-hanging fruit, as we would say, and then through the work that we've done together in terms of identifying them quick wins and low-hanging fruit. There's been a number of projects and products that we've looked at. I think main focus for us was around the packaging, because we saw that as a quick win rather than looking at products themselves, which obviously carry huge amounts of regulatory sort of resistance to being changed. Yeah. So the packaging for us was something of interest, something that other industries, i.e. the food industry, have been doing for many, many years in terms of materials and machinery capable of packaging in a different style. Yeah. So we identified that, and that's what we've been chipping away on quite successfully. Yeah. And then I think the wider scope is around the products themselves. Looking at things like PVC-free, for example, materials that are alternative to what we're currently using. We're very aware that we work in an industry of single-use throwaway plastic. So we have to do something to drive that kind of ethos of improvement and sustainability at the core value of everything that we do as well.
Yeah, brilliant. And Claire, where does product sit in the Boston strategy?
Yes, so I mean, just echoing everyone's point, product's tough. This is a tough nut to crack. You know, the regulatory and also just the timelines of development. You know, so from conception to approval, you're looking at a good decade of a timeline. So I think I completely agree that the packaging is where we've started as well. Packaging, it's, again, that's not easy, but it's more of a low-hanging fruit. There are things that you can implement just by looking at size of packaging, size, efficiencies there, then alternative materials. Really understanding though, but you've got to quantify and measure. So going back to life cycle assessments, which again are tough, but they also help you understand internally where the impact is. So we have established a packaging and labelling sustainability team. So they're really looking at really good collaborations. They're outside of our business divisions, but feed into R&D, and they're looking out there saying, what are the latest developments? How can we implement them? How can we test them? How can we really optimize and move forward? We have a group working on we're looking at life cycle assessment pilots at the moment. You know, what is our methodology to do it? Because there are a variety of different methodologies. I know we've discussed lots and worked with you guys as well. Yeah. And then, you know, it's then what do you tackle first? The other pieces I think are really important. So we have a program on product, but it's also looking at the beyond product. It's the impact of use. So it's things like, are you considering using maybe a product that need to have fewer redos in a procedure. So there are those things as well to consider actually when you're thinking about your product and your wider product strategy is how can you use a product to help keep patients out of hospital? Is your product able to mean that you have fewer interventions? So those are parts of the consideration process as well. So it's doing that action on product and packaging and thinking of the other things. Yeah,
so it's not only about the product and its impact. You could look at it from a cradle to gate perspective, but then there's so much then happens with that product in use, how it fits into the care pathway.
Exactly.
And as you said, if we can design our device that might mitigate a second surgery at some point in that care pathway, for instance, that could negate double the carbon footprint or more of the product itself.
Exactly.
Yeah. Paul, if I come, Tom, if I come to you again, you've gone down the circular road from the very beginning, and circularity is kind of the holy grail of sustainability. Very difficult to get there for organizations that had already gone down a very different route. What has that meant for the product to kind of facilitate that, or what have you had to build around the business? It's more than just the product.
Yeah, certainly. I think, so we've already talked about circularity, and that's where we've been built from the ground up, and probably the easiest one to use is, I'll use an example, again, surgeon's gown. I think everyone can relate to a surgeon's gown. We all know what it looks like and everything there. So if we have a look from the start, we look at the product and we look at the performance of the product. So the product has to perform to the medical device regulatory standards. Now, one of those standards, for instance, is fluid resistance. And for fluid resistance, that requires fluorocarbons at the moment, or otherwise known as forever chemicals. So one of the really exciting projects we're working on with Denmark, with the Danish Healthcare Authority, is producing the world's first system for forever chemical free, or PFAS, fluorocarbon free coatings on them. And there's some really big challenges. We've got textile and chemical manufacturers we're closely working with to get systems which will do this. This is systems that can maintain water resistance despite being washed, being dried, being sterilised, being used in a clinical setting, and then going through that a target of 100 times before it gets to the end of life. So I think that's been an important thing. The other thing to think about with the product for what we're doing with reuse is the logistics. How do we decrease the logistics footprint? So for instance, using electric vehicles, but then again, using things that are close to site. So you're talking about you've got your big facility where you have to use some gas to do it. We're looking at what's the smallest facility we can make, but still make it commercially feasible. Because we do know the bigger the scale is, the more efficiencies you can get in, because you get people and machines, you can invest more into machinery, all working together nicely. But we're looking at what's the smallest we can get it, so we can actually have digitally networked hubs everywhere, so we can actually, what that provides is resilience. And also with digital, you can actually learn from each other as well, and everyone can be networked, and you've got less to travel. If we have, some sort of disaster, natural or unnatural, you can still get that resilience and keep that local supply going with these close hubs, and decrease all that transport cost. And then after logistics, you get to end of life. Now, traditionally, when we started in the textile laundry industry, the best practice was incineration for waste reclamation. Otherwise, it got incinerated and went to landfill. In the worst case, macerated and put down the drain. And this is for a reusable. Now people are looking at recycling and repurposing. So some of the work that we're doing, for instance, with Nottingham Trent University, we're looking at how do you take a surgical gown, at the end of the life, how you do then turn it into an endoscopy gown. Then at the end of its life, how do you then turn it into a patient's gown? Then at the end of that's life, how do you then repurpose it to something else? And then when you come right down to the end of that, how do you recycle it most efficiently? Can you do a textile to textile recycle? Yes, you can, but you'll still get off waste. So we've been looking at technologies to keep it in the system where we actually palletize everything and then form them into hollowware or bowls that are used in the operating theatre that can still be sterilised using the same material. And that can be reused and again. So actually keep that material in the system the whole time. But we must remember that recycling is not the answer. There's a big energy. There's a big energy use. There's a big resource use for recycling. So keeping that circularity, keeping that balance, and keeping those key things in place. Product performance, product logistics, the repurposing, and then the recycling, but keeping that all in balance.
Yeah, I love that. One of my favourite ways to illustrate the circular economy is through the value hill. And as we slip down the value hill, that product is losing value all the way down. So if we can maintain it in those higher value states, possibly it's not well suited for this particular function anymore, okay, but let's keep it in a fabric state and reuse it as something else, rather than jumping straight to, okay, we'll recycle it then. That's really good to hear. So we'll move on now and talk a bit more about what does the future hold. It's an ever-evolving landscape, and I know the roadmap's the NHS is kind of dictating certain steps for us, but what are kind of the ABHI members looking to as kind of next steps, kind of short term, and what might be some of those longer term goals?
So I think, as Claire mentioned earlier, the next milestones in the roadmap do get increasingly difficult. So we'll see. But we are engaged with the NHS a lot on it and how it's going to turn out and what the policy behind it is going to be. And very much trying to get clarity over what the requirements and expectations are of suppliers for those points. But I think one of the biggest challenges that we hear from members often is that we work in a global economy. Very, very few companies just sell to the UK or just sell to the NHS. So differing requirements, particularly in terms of sustainability and environmental reporting, is incredibly difficult. So I think it's one of the positives looking forward is that the NHS has had 5 different jurisdictions agree to align with it. So Health and Human Services in the US, Norwegian Hospital Procurement Trust, Australian government in Ireland as well, and one that I have forgotten, I'm afraid. But I think it's a really positive step that it's not just the UK trying to go it alone, we're ahead, but other countries are looking to us as role models to follow along suit. And some of the challenges that have been spoken about today with the internal conversations, getting everyone on board, all those sorts of problems might be putting it a bit harshly. Hopefully the fact that everyone is looking to the UK and is wanting to be on the same journey as us is incredibly encouraging. So I think from the big picture point of view, that global alignment is one of the biggest things.
Right, that's interesting, because sometimes we hear those comments, well, the UK is only 5% of my market, so I could probably avoid to lose that and try and increase market share somewhere else. But I guess what you're saying is globally this is widely being adopted now. The NHS has set forth a precedent, and really it's a matter of time before other markets are looking at something very similar. And do we feel like, I know Clay, obviously Boston's working very internationally, is this something as well that Boston are super conscious of?
Oh yes, absolutely. So my role looking at Europe, Middle East and Africa. So at the moment, the developing markets are, they're still talking about how do we actually get patients treated. Many of the regions, when you talk to them about sustainability, it's very humbling. It's actually, we don't have enough, access to be able to get our patients even the help they need. So sustainability in this environmental sense is not necessarily on the radar for them, so there are areas to address there. But when we look across Europe, honestly, I've been in my role a year and a half, and it's an unrecognisable landscape. When I started, the story was around the NHS, it was around the UK. So working for a global organisation, headquartered in the US, just the UK, everyone goes, that's really interesting. Is it enough to really catalyse full change to the organisation? Probably not, at least at the speed. But now seeing it absolutely permeating, we're hearing more and more requirements, more and more mandates from government. I was just saying about, for example, in France next year, 100% of all public tenders will have sustainability criteria within them. That really focuses the mind. It really galvanises a business forward. And then aligning, I think, to Addie's point, what would be really helpful for us all is to have aligned asks, to have that sort of alignment through the healthcare system, saying these are the things that we're really looking at, this is what we prioritise now, and to have a roadmap, which is what the NHS have done really well. And I know even in the US, there are some of the big group purchasing organisations, they're actually looking at the NHS as well and saying, we're thinking of putting a roadmap in place that's really similar. So it's good, it's moving things forward. It's a challenge though.
Yeah.
So it's that balance.
Yeah. And Richard, what does the kind of the immediate next steps and possibly longer term next steps look like for Pennine?
So the future looks really really promising actually. I think the main criteria for us is that we will build resilience and more reliability for UK manufacturing. We want to drive that what we call the triple S guarantee, so safety, security of supply and sustainability as a triple promise to our customers and building that value. Looking at supply chains, how volatile they are. It took one ship in the Suez Canal on a windy day and catastrophic results for the whole of the supply chain. So it's how we build that resilience within the UK, how we bring on more products into our portfolio that we've shipped out over the last 30 years, and this is across the whole of the industry. We challenge the MDR regulation in terms of why we pushed them products out in the first place, bringing them closer to home. If we haven't got a supply chain of thousands of miles away, we're 13 miles away from our local NHS hub. Right. So it's all them kind of good, tangible things that we're working on, delivering that value, making sure that internally as well that we're doing the good stuff that we've been doing with Lean Six Sigma and the Green Belt and Black Belt projects as well, and eliminating that waste internally. And then bringing everyone on board. Resilience isn't just about the sustainability piece. Pennine will be here for another 61 years. So it's about building that security for our employees as an employee organisation as well.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And Tom, if I come to you as well, I know you've grown very rapidly with your organisation and gone international as well quite quickly. What does kind of the future look like for Revolution Zero?
So for us, a really critical thing is events like today, and it's all around collaboration and partnership and joining up and seeing how we can work with the community. It's around throwing away the sort of ideas about competition and that sort of business competition. It's about linking arms and getting together and moving forwards together. So that's absolutely critical in our minds. We also like, echoing what Richard just said. It's about how we can do things and talking about our local supply model, how we can have local. One of our sort of hopefully not too far future maps is having manufacturing, repurposing, recycling, and all the reprocessing all in one centre. A few of our more specific things are low temperature decontamination. So we've got low temperature decontamination project on at the moment, which actually, if you go through a renewable energy, doesn't actually save you that much energy in heating the water. However, it does save immense amounts of cost. So decreasing the energy requirements. If you're decreasing the energy requirements, again, utilising really useful chemicals that will be biodegradable, be really dilutable, will not be harmful to the environment is another thing. And then we've got big projects on around reusable packaging, and making reusable packaging really the status quo, or what's actually done as normal, as opposed to what's currently done within the medical device, which is everything comes in single-use packaging. So we're doing validation tests on some of our packaging at the moment, and continue to work on that. But as I say at the right start, I can't reinforce enough the importance of collaboration, partnership, and joining and linking up.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So I'm not sure if I should have mentioned this at the start, but the QR code up on the screen hopefully will feed in some Q&A, and Dan's on the floor as well, so you can also stick your hand up if you've got a question for the panel, and yeah, we're happy to open things up.
I've been paying attention to the Slido, so I've got some of the Slido
you've got them
questions
already?
here.
Oh, that saves me looking great.
In our sector, how much carbon offsetting is acceptable?
In the sector, how much carbon offsetting is acceptable?
That's a question from
Wow.
Anonymous.
So I think, well, anyone like to take this before I'll jump in on it?
To me, the carbon offsetting comes last. That's not where you start. You start with what you can cut, what you can convert, and the offsetting comes right at the end. So it's measure first, understand where your carbon sits, what your strategy is for removing as much of that carbon, and only offset if you absolutely have to at the end. Offsetting, and there is a place for it. And even, as we say within our strategy, the 3C, the compensator is the final piece. So there is a place for as little as possible after you've done all of the other work.
Yeah.
And then it's qualified, good quality carbon credits. So it's really understanding the impact of where you're investing and making sure it's done right.
Yeah, great. Richard?
Yeah, I was just going to add to that. So we've spoken a lot about quick wins and low-hanging fruit. Carbon offsetting is not one of them. On our journey so far, we've not even considered offsetting.
Yeah.
So it's about identifying the processes internally and externally that actually will credibly sort of give us that, push forward.
Yeah. So it is something that when we're delivering a carbon reduction plan, it might be a question that we get asked back by the client is why don't we just start offsetting? And it's exactly these reasons. It's a little bit of a Wild West at the moment as a market. It's really unregulated. You might be putting money into a scheme which disappears or has very unproven or dubious track records of whether it will deliver any actual carbon reductions or carbon savings. That's one reason. Another one is that the demand for them, as I understand it, is forecast to dramatically increase. So if you're planning on purchasing carbon offsets, this could be a rapidly increasing cost. So it's not something you really want to go down.
So I was just going to make a comment. So we do a shared revenue model with some of our customers where we don't so much carbon offset, but we'll invest in regeneration things. So one thing I'd like you to think about is how many trees do you think were planted in the world around for carbon offsetting last year? And I want you to, when you're also considering that question, how many trees were burnt down by wildfires in the world last year, and as a direct result of climate change? So I think you'll find that probably more trees were burnt down than planted. The trees that were planted, the trees that were burnt down were trees that were very many years old. The trees that were planted are young, and they're not going to survive as well in the climate that we're creating. So we must do something about it. One of the things we invested in was seagrass planting, because seagrass is a wonderful way of doing it. However, I'm wondering how many of those seagrass beds have now been taken out by water sewage, by the water companies discharging sewage all around the place. So we need to be really careful. We need to think about actually not just doing a checkbox exercise, doing it actually for the real reasons of actually restoring and regenerating the world. Because it is a Wild West, and it's about money making in many times.
Yeah.
Spot on.
Great stuff. Is it something the ABHI members have brought up at all? Addie, has that been mentioned in the meetings?
Not that much, I think, because of all the reasons that we mentioned, and it's not the first step. It's not necessarily advised. There's a lot of red herrings with it. It's, again, like if you plant a tree, you can only count it as removing carbon emissions if it lives, which you don't know that it does if you pay a tenner for someone to go do it in another country.
Yeah.
So I think just to echo what everyone else has said, that there's a place for it, but certainly not anywhere near the beginning of your journey.
Yeah, fantastic.
Okay, got another question on do you see medical device design standards being updated to include consideration of sustainability within, for example, design control? If so, how and when?
Yes. I'm happy to kick off on that one. So with the Design for Life program, part of that's been a collaborative exercise organised by the Department of Health and Social Care, and they've had regulatory bodies included in that. And I know with the work of the ABHI, there's been quite a lot of signalling, really, to the regulators of that we need standards to support sustainability, because if it's not in there, medical device companies design products to meet standards, and so the standards really need to accommodate and be supportive of transitions to, for instance, more sustainable materials. So yeah, I don't know if anyone else has got in terms of standards.
I think just to add that I'm not super close to it, but there is an awful lot of work going on at BSI behind the scenes on various ISO standards and updating them and bringing in sustainability aspects, trying to pull it all together. So yes, I think just wait a little bit while they pull it all together and publish it.
Yeah, it can be difficult to know where to start if you don't know what's going to be inclusive in the standard, but I think there are sustainable design principles which are pretty much universal, which if you can adopt and include them in your device within the realms of the existing standard, there's still a lot you can do, such as thinking about disassembly, thinking about end of life, trying to go down a mono-material route wherever you can. So there are things that you can still do.
I'm going to go old school here. We have a question from the floor.
Sorry, it was too much to write down. So I'm Ros McFadden, I'm a lactation consultant, and I've designed a lactation pod. So you're probably thinking, why am I asking you a question? So the result of my product results in longevity of breastfeeding, which results in lower carbon emissions because it's the lowest form of nutrition. And we sort of tap into 4 of the SDGs. So it's real. In developing my product, it's really important that we're starting to look at sustainable materials, but we're a really micro business. So my question, or looking for advice, that actually that's part of my sales, that's part of my selling criteria to the NHS and to businesses that invest in our product, that they are investing in their staff, they're investing in the health of their staff and their families, and then in the NHS, the wider health and sustainability of their retention of NHS staff. But also, you were talking about helping with the health outcome goals, which we do. But we're very much talking about the beginning, and it's something that I feel we need a bigger voice. And how do I get that across? How do I get that platform? Do I talk to people like yourself, Addie, or I just want to get that message out there that our product can be sold not as a carbon offset, but as a future offset, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I don't know if anyone can answer, or if I've actually asked a question.
Yeah, I think what you're probably touching on there is more around the care pathway. So it's beyond the product itself, but what it means in terms of an ongoing carbon reduction. So if you're looking for this to be a lever to pull to kind of entice the NHS and to look to adopt this, then you really want to look at the carbon impacts on the pathway. So what's the alternative if you're going down a baby formula route instead, for instance? Then so you're probably going down more of like a life cycle analysis type route to understand the carbon impacts of that versus what your innovation is. Right, okay.
I know what the figure is. So for every kilo of formula that's produced, it's 4 kilos of CO2. So, I can sort of do it on that basis of, for every month a baby breastfeeds opposed to having formula food, we can sort of do it on that way, but also looking at the carbon offset of the reduction in breast cancer, in ovarian cancer, in the 4 most hospitalised diseases that babies have. So there's so many aspects of it. So I suppose that's what I do. I I put that into my life cycle of products and promotion.
I think that you've gone down the right route then there with it.
Yay.
Tom's got something to add.
So I think, you've touched on a very interesting point, which I think we've come across as well. And the strategy that we've found most successful, we've had direct approaches by more than 150 different NHS organisations. So we don't have any sales or marketing team or anything like that. And that has all come from engagement on social media. And for us, we chose 4 platforms, started off daily and then worked down into working out what worked. And we actually found, of all the platforms, that thing that I'm still going to call Twitter, but anyway, I'll still call it Twitter. And that we found to be the most useful because we actually found there was a community in there which gravitated towards our message. But it's also because what you've got very busy medical professionals. They might be procurement, they might be clinicians. They're just going to tap onto their social media feed once a day for 5 to 10 minutes. They're going to find things. So if you do the hard work for them, there's a vast amount to do with your product. They will be interested in that. You've got maternity, you've got all sorts of different areas covered. So you do different research about that. It's only going to help your product knowledge and your knowledge of your customer more. You learn, distill your learnings online on whatever form. LinkedIn or probably Twitter are good ones at the moment, and it's going to change, no doubt. But then do that on a very regular basis so they can rely on going to what you do, and that you'll get brand loyalty. You will, and they'll get to know what your value proposition is. It's my only advice for that.
Sorry, just want to add, do you work with any health innovation networks? I think that might be a good route, because adoption of innovation to the NHS is what it is. But the role of the health innovation networks is to try and get those innovations adopted. So, I think that's probably one of the best routes, other than obviously the one that Tom spoke to as well.
Yep.
Okay, we've got another question from Slido. A major issue we face is wanting to adapt sustainable material without sacrificing the sterility of our product. How are your companies approaching this?
So material and sterilization. Yeah, I think, so this is, if you head over to our stand just here, we have a number of levers, and one of them is materials. And this is something that a lot of companies will jump to, thinking that's probably the most sustainable thing I could do, right, is to change the material. But it can be a very difficult thing to do, particularly if sterility, repeat sterilization in particular, might be a particular focus. So I would say it's going to be about working with material experts. I know Jo over at Albus just here, she's got a big wealth of experience in materials as well. She'd be good to talk to. But there are increasingly, it's a hot topic in like the plastic sector at the moment. An awful lot of what the development work is going on is all around sustainable materials. So there are new materials coming to the market, but it is a case of what's already kind of validated and is kind of safe, if you like, to be used in a medical device, and will meet those requirements, say around sterility. It's a really important one.
I was going to add as well, the materials piece is obviously really, really relevant, but there's also considerations just around process. So, for example, we've actually been focusing on significant reduction in sterilization chemicals, etc., and by consolidating and figuring out how we're actually sterilizing, how many products we're putting through, and how we're doing the sterilization process. So there are efficiencies that will actually reduce the impact of the amount of sterilants you're having to use.
That's a really good point. I know with like steam sterilization, the amount of water that's used in steam sterilizers is kind of phenomenal. So yeah, if you could be more efficient in the way you're sterilizing something, that's also the carbon saving. So yeah, kind of thinking beyond the product as well. That's a really good point.
Okay, another question is, I'm not sure this one's easy to answer, but are payers, i.e. the NHS in the UK, willing to pay for sustainable alternatives, or is pricing /cost parity required?
Who'd like to go on that one? Great, Tom's in a good position on this one.
The simple answer is almost across the line, no, they're not willing to pay for it at all. There are some exceptions to this. There are some exceptions where they will pay. but we generally find we need to offer, and we can offer, because of the efficiencies you get through a circular economy, a lower cost, a better quality, and hitting on the waste and the sustainability targets. The most challenging thing is actually getting them to change, and it's the change management which is the challenging thing. If you add another cost on top of that, that's going to be even more challenging, even though they've got net zero targets and so forth. Ideally, you need to think outside the box, think, how am I going to decrease the cost rather than having an increased cost one.
Yeah, and I think you've gone down more of a product as a service kind of a route, so it becomes less of initial capex kind of expenditure and more of an ongoing arrangement, a little bit of a different approach. Anyone else want to weigh in on that? Cost versus sustainable savings to the NHS?
So not necessarily at the product level, but the fact that there is the social value questions in tenders now mean that the weighting is not 100% on price. There is that move towards it, not necessarily because of the carbon saving that your product individually has will be taken into account, but depending on the social value questions that are asked, it could be included in the tender. So I think it is moving in that direction, but it's, difficult.
Yeah, I'll just add to that. In terms of cost, it is. I agree with everything that's been said so far, but I think it's the value. We need to put more focus on the value that we can offer as UK manufacturers or global manufacturers, being regional or business units, and how that then comes across to deliver the savings in a different way. So the catastrophic years that we went through with COVID, learning that supply chains were so volatile with different elements. Geopolitics now plays a part in it. The Red Sea plays a part in it. There's more value in manufacturing goods here in the UK. There is a price to pay for that, but I do think that will start to change the way in which the direction of the wind is blowing.
Yeah. Claire?
And just, I guess, the final add in there as well is around the care pathway approach. So if you are, again, value for product, the value piece is important. Efficiency savings with a product that may be more sustainable, it may then across the care pathway then reduce cost. So it's product, it's the process, and it's that care pathway piece that needs to be considered.
Yeah, so really a holistic approach. You might be focused looking at a material which might answer your prayers because it's going to halve the carbon footprint, but that's going to double the cost of your product. Well, okay, think beyond that. Think care pathway. If being more sustainable is costing you more, then you're doing it wrong. It's ultimately it's going to be a really tough sell if you're increasing the cost. So, Tom, do you have something to add?
I think, picking up on that, and also picking up what Richard said. If we look at resilience, so for instance, for NHS, they will generally pay £3,000 to £3,500 for a hip replacement operation, whereas the textiles for that hip replacement operation cost around £65. If they're not there, that money's wasted. So you lose that, £2,990 or whatever it is that you would have otherwise paid if you'd had those £65 worth of material there. So those supply chain resilience, that does buy you an awful lot of value going forward.
Good way to look at it.
Okay, I think that's us out of time. We finished bang on time, 12:31. Have you got anything else to add at the end, Richard?
Really just to thank my panel, really. I think they've been absolutely fantastic. These guys are all really experts in what they're doing, and I'd just like to thank them for coming and sharing their insights with everybody. So big hand to the panel.
We hope that you enjoyed today's podcast. If you'd like to hear more of what we've got coming up, be sure to like and subscribe. Stay tuned for more.